I only read one book, but it's a good book, don't you know? I act the way I act because the good book tells me so. If I want to know how to be good, it's to the good book that I go. Because the good book is a book, and it is good, and it's a book.
And upon hearing from his sons, upon their return from Egypt, that his favourite son, Joseph, who many years hence had been said unto him to have been eaten by hungry beasts, was still alive, and in direct defiance of Pharaoh's rather specific instructions, that did say that he should leave all the stuff that he did have, and come directly unto Egypt, Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. For, like all weary travellers on a long journey, he did fancy stopping off at a roadside services to partake of a flame-grilled burnt offering in a sesame seed bun with salad, accompanied by a large soft drink of his choosing. And God, who did have a perfect memory, and was renowned for the consistency of his word, spake unto Israel in the visions of the night while he was sleeping, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And after a short time, realizing that God, who by now had declared that Jacob would be no longer known as such, but would instead be from that day known as Israel, twice, on two separate occasions, was calling unto him, and in his dream did leave off from all that he was doing, and he said, Here am I. And because both Israel or Jacob might just get him confused with some other figment of his imagination that he might envision in his dreams, he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. And in his dream Israel did ask unto God why he did yet again get his name wrong, and why he did appear unto him as a midget, riding a pig, wearing nothing more than a pink tutu, a pair of oversized clown shoes, and a top hat. And God did say unto him, Hey, don't look at me, it's your dream. And then did continue, saying with a sort of certainty that would imply that what he was saying would indeed come to pass, I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again, implying that although Jacob would go unto Egypt, he would indeed one day return unto Canaan. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob did say unto him, Not looking like that you won't. And relenting, God did sigh, and then holding his nose and puffing out his cheeks, did with a boing sound transform into an aged old man with a long silver beard and flowing white robes. And Jacob did nod in approval, and say, That's better. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba. And the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, who by this time was beginning to get rather confused about his own name, and was developing a split personality, and their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him, for children did indeed marry young in those days. And they took their cattle, and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, that Pharaoh had indeed told them to leave behind, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, but not his daughters' sons and his daughters' daughters. Unless, of course, his daughters had had their sons and daughters by their brothers, who were indeed Jacob's sons, which would, of course, not be at all surprising, going by previous events earlier on in this narrative. And all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. And because we have not just had a good biblical list of truly unpronounceable names for a while, and such things should best be sprung upon the reader by surprise, lest they should skip to the next chapter, these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, who on occasion did come up with good advice for his brethren, that they did rarely listen to, even though their mother did tell them that their brother did know us best, as she would know after the knowing that he did give her. And the sons of Reuben, Hanok, who did invent a way of sleeping in a blanket tied between two trees, and Phalu, who was a complete Dick, whose name was originally plural, being one letter longer, until they did remove the end of it, when he was circumcised. And Hezron, who would have been a world-class ice skater, had he not lived all his entire life in the desert, not far from the equator. And Carmi, whose last name was Abaruna, who did write poetry, and did invent a thing called surfing, and a spice which did come in a bottle emblazoned with a ship. That was indeed old. And the sons of Simeon, who by this time had been shaved and put in a suit, and did invent a drink called PG Tips tea, which he did like greatly for the taste. Jemuel, whose name would later on, in a sequel to this entirely accurate and consistent narrative, be spelt differently, and would also have an almost completely different set of brothers. And Jamin, who did entirely revolutionize the donut, and would one day, many centuries hence, have a song written about him by a man from a place called Jamaica, that, like the Lord, did look upon the herb, and did know it was good. And Hohad, who did like contemporary dance, which did mean that he did shake around a lot in a way that nobody could understand, even though they did say that they could. And Jackin, who did become a club DJ, and did invent house music, and Zohar, who would in later life fake his own death and become a hairstylist in a faraway land, and should not be confused with a book of superstitious mystical cosmology that was probably written by someone from a place called Spain many centuries hence. And Shaul, the son of a Canaanitish woman whose name isn't worth mentioning, who grew up to be a big girl's blouse. And the sons of Levi, who, though having a name that was an anagram of the word evil, suffered no ill effects. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, who would all go on to be mentioned in the sequel to this narrative as founders of various factions within the 12 tribes of Israel, along with someone called Mahali, who, though left out here, in a further sequel would be confused with being a son of Levi also. And the sons of Judah, who was indeed handed the shitty stick in life right from the outset by having a name that was in fact the word evil spelt backwards in the language of his fathers. And Onan, who did find fame, not for what he did, but for what he didn't do, and did pay the price for hesitating and pulling out at the last minute. And Sheila, who was a gender-confused Australian, and as we did hear in a previous chapter, was famous for not knowing a woman. And Perez and Zara, who were both twins, whose mother would have appeared on the Jeremy Kyle show if such a thing did exist at the time, and who was also technically their sister-in-law. But, as we doth know, and Onan died in the land of Canaan, because the Lord just didn't like them, and so were not in fact taken unto the land of Egypt, like all the rest, unless they did dig them up first. And the sons of Perez were Hezron, who wasn't the son of Reuben, and Hamel, whose first name was Mark, who did live on a farm with his aunt and his uncle, until one day they were murdered, and so he did go off with an old man to rescue the sister he never knew he had, from a man who inexplicably turned out to be his father, and save the galaxy from a tyrannical evil emperor. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, who shouldn't be confused with the Tola that did, in a sequel to this narrative, become a great judge after the death of a man called Abimelech, who was a right evil bastard, and shouldn't be confused with the man called Abimelech, who both Tola's great-grandfather Isaac and great-great-grandfather Abraham did rip off when they did both tell him that their wife was really their sister, in what had by that time come to be the family business. And Fuba, who was utterly focused up beyond all recognition. And Job, who would be less known than his later namesake, who would have his entire family killed and his life turned upside down, when the Lord, who cannot bear to be in the presence of evil and sin, doth make a crazy bet with Satan, after Satan doth call around unto heaven for drinks. And Shimron, who did invent shepherd's pie. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered and Elon and Jaraheel, who were in fact dwarfs, who would later work in a mine digging for gold, and they did live in a cottage in the woods with 7 of their friends along with a young girl who they did know, though in years to come they would be left out of the story, as unlike Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy and Dopey, their names were difficult to pronounce, and because a man called Walt, who would one day make them all famous, did think that their names did sound a little too Jewish. These be the sons of Leah, which he bare unto Jacob in Padamaram, with his daughter Dinah, who only gets a mention because in a previous chapter she doth go off and get raped by the prince of Shechem, which resulted in her brothers focusing over the locals and going on an ape-rage killing spree, killing everyone and looting the whole town. All the souls of his sons and his daughters were 33, which is only accurate if thee doth not count the 2 that had died, but thou countest the son of Levi that was left out and isn't mentioned until later. And the sons of Gad, who was indeed a lucky bastard, that some would consider to be a god. Xiphon, who would one day come to be a vampire, and should us not be confused with either the angel Zephon, who was sent by the archangel Gabriel to find out where Satan had landed after his fall, presumably because the Lord, who doth know everything, couldn't find him, or Zaphod, who was in fact a 2-headed alien from a planet in the vicinity of Betelgeuse, which incidentally, from the Arab language of the lands near where Xiphon did live, would be mistranslated as armpit of Orion, which coincidentally, given that nobody of that time had actually gone there, would be a remarkably accurate description of the place, if the word mistranslated as Orion is replaced with the correctly translated words the galaxy, for the place was a real shithole. And Haggy, who was Scottish, and invented a popular dish that did involve shoving a sheep's vital organs back up its own back passage, along with some oatmeal and a big onion, and boiling it for 3 hours, which did probably explain why nobody did want it, and did exclaim that it was indeed haggis. And Shunny, who was about as intelligent as that which doth drop out of the back end of a goat, and Esbon, who, according to others, would be the grandson of his father's half-brother Benjamin. Eric, who did become an explorer, and did go on to comprehensively chart the inside of his own nasal passages after many years of extensive probing, and Arodi, who did often go wandering off, and Areli, who would have been a little mermaid if his father had spelt his name correctly. And the sons of Asher, Jimna, who was never seen again after embarking on a quest to be the world hide-and-seek champion, and Ishua, who discovered that camel dung was indeed inedible, and Isu, who did put him up to it, and Bera, who would have been the first man to walk on the moon had he had a longer ladder, and Sarah, their sister, who would go on to be quite a celebrity, and would be one of those who would be listed amongst those who would escape Egypt when the Israelites did eventually leave there, over 2 centuries later, and go on to live to the ripe old age of 1,000. And the sons of Bera, Heber, who would make his fortune by opening a string of fast food restaurants that did sell chicken sandwiches, and Malakel, who couldn't quite make his mind up if he did want to be known as Malcolm or Michael. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban, her father, gave to Leah, his daughter, as her servant and general dog's body, and these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, who was his intended choice and favoured wife right from the outset, and the whole reason he did stay for 20 years in Padamaram working for her father Laban, Joseph and Benjamin. And unto Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manas, who was immediately forgettable, and Ephraim, his younger brother, who in this narrative will be considerably more memorable when favoured by his grandfather, which Asenath, the daughter of Pottingshed, priest of On, bare unto him, as at the time the Lord had no problem with the Hebrews intermarrying with members of other tribes, just as long as those other tribes were not tribes of Canaanites. And the sons of Benjamin, who at this time, according to the immediately preceding chapters, was all but an infant, even though his mother Rachel had apparently died many more years before he was born, were Bella, who did own a successful woman's magazine, and Becker, who would have been Wimbledon tennis champion had he been able to play tennis, and Ashbel, who was so named because he was a most legendary alcoholic who did burn off the end of his manhood one day when he did try putting out the campfire by passing water upon it, Gera, who did accidentally invent boiled sweets, and Naaman, who did have an entirely relaxed, if not entirely negative, view on life, who had a hearing problem, and Rosh, who was really called Ross, but had a speech impediment, Muppin, who was purple, and did have skin like soft fabric, and was one half of a novelty stage act, where he did pretend to be a sock puppet who sat on his brother's knee, and Uppim, who was the other half, and did complete the illusion by sticking his arm up his brother's back passage all the way up to the elbow, and did pretend to operate him, and Ard, who did have no neck, and was someone you wouldn't want to pick a fight with. These are the sons of Rachel, which were born to Jacob. All the souls were 14, most of whom were sons of Benjamin, who did have more children than all of his other brothers, and did greatly enjoy getting to know the girls of his father's household, and there could get us not enough, and given the short time between his arrival back from Egypt and his departure to go back again, must have therefore meant that he did get to know them rather often. And the sons of Dan, Hushim, and that's it. With that's it not being the name of his other son, but rather he did have sons, not, but rather just one. And the sons of Naphtali, Jeziel, who did, according to him, have a pair of magic underpants that did never need washing, and Gunni, who did invent the turnip, and Jezer, who did front a popular television program where he did review ox carts, and Shilem, who did one day have a strange notion that, just maybe, all of time and space did originate from the expansion of a single point without dimension a tremendously long time ago, and has been expanding ever since, and would continue to do so forever, and that the earth that he did live upon was nothing more than an ordinary planet that orbited an unexceptional star that was one of countless trillions in a galaxy that was among a great many that had formed due to a thing that would one day be called gravity, and that all life upon it did originate as a consequence of the innate properties of matter, and the chemistry that does result, and over millions of millennia, through a process of gradual adaptive changes in the resulting populations in response to changes in environmental conditions that one day someone with a long white beard would call evolution by way of natural selection, all of the living things, including himself and all life around him, had arose, and then he did dismiss it, as it did sound too far-fetched and contrived, and didn't involve cows, magical thinking, or talking snakes. These are the sons of Bilhah, which Laban, who was her father, gave unto Rachel, his daughter, to be her personal servant, as a wedding present, and she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives. All the souls were 66, which was one more than the combined number of all those mentioned in this narrative. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, and so were already there, and never went anywhere, were 2 souls. And therefore, despite being one short, all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70, because with biblical maths, when you have a man and his 66 family members travel unto a place to meet a family member who had already gone there before them, who has 2 sons who were born there, the number of people that actually travelled there becomes 70, and not 68. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph, to direct his face unto Goshen, as he didn't have the slightest clue where the place was, and road signs had yet to be invented. And Jacob, being old in his years, didn't fancy wandering around lost in the deserts as he had done previously in his youth, when he did arrive back in Canaan from Padamaran, and did completely fail to find his brother's house, because he refused to ask for directions, and with little fuss they came into the land of Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot, and went up to meet Israel his father, who had decided that he would no longer be known as Jacob for the rest of this chapter, to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while, in yet another scene worthy of winning a small gold statuette that did look like someone's uncle. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. Which obviously wasn't going to happen, as the Lord God had promised that he would yet again bring Israel alive out of Egypt. And Joseph said unto his brethren, and unto his father's house, Despite going up to get to them, I will go up even more, and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me, for it is only right, as he has invited them here. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, which is a job done by cowboys, and completely ignoring thy instructions to leave behind in Canaan all their stuff, for there shall be better stuff for them to own in Egypt, they have brought their flocks, and their herds, and all that they have. And because I just know that he shall be so excited to finally meet you, it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, What is your occupation? That ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle, from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And I shall just know that he shall be so overjoyed to have such an abomination in his presence. And out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, in a tent at the edge of an encampment, an old man did survey the chapter he had just written with the inspiration and direction of the Lord, who, while he wasn't looking, did replace the book he had been reading back upon the old man's bookshelf. And as the Lord did look around the tent for the plate of spicy buffalo wings that he had put down while he did narrate, the old man did try to pronounce the names that the Lord had listed in what would thankfully be the last genealogy of the narrative. And after a while he did ask unto the Lord if he was indeed sure that the list was indeed accurate, and wouldn't be contradicted by similar lists that would come later. And the Lord did reply unto him, that of course it was accurate, as being the Lord God, who was indeed all-knowing and perfect in every way, he was not one who did make mistakes. Or at least mistakes he did regret, if thou did of course discount the incident with all the water, the big boat, and all the animals, or before that, letting his angels come down from heaven and mess with his creation, or before that, the episode with the apple tree and the snake and the talking spare rib. And the man did think upon this, and did then ask of the Lord of how many cattle he would have if he did have 9 at the start, and did add unto them 5 more. And the Lord did think upon this for some time, and then did take off his sandals, and did remove his socks, and after a lot of muttering, did proudly say, Lots.